Hello and welcome to the Joe Ligato Show. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Ligato, and today we're going to be talking about Andrew Tate. And I don't know what to think of this person because I've talked in other videos about how I think he is controlled opposition to a certain extent. I think he's one of those people who doesn't necessarily realize he's controlled opposition, like he turned down the money or turned down some of the blackmail, but they only allow him to continue to talk, I believe, because of the fact that he's still within the narrative to a certain extent. Okay? And so I think they could pull his cord really whenever they wanted, if they wanted to cause him problems. But let's see what he has to say here, because despite my strong disagreements with things like his webcam business and what he talks about functioning relationships, because I know the research on those topics and I know what he's doing is just wrong for civilization building. But despite that, he does have some good points. And so we're going to go over one of those potential good points today. So Andrew Tate is posting here saying Europe is done. And I'd argue that even North America, Canada, United States are pretty much done at this point too. And he says Western Europe is 0% European anywhere. Not true, but it's certainly the case that it's becoming less and less European genetically, ethnicity related. It says white girls get raped and murdered by migrants every day and the news won't show it. Yeah, this is something that is very concerning when it comes to things like the rape crimes that occurred for thousands of white girls in the United Kingdom. I can't remember the names of the places. I don't want to name them off the top of my head, but there were a few different places. It was like, no, I don't want to even name it. But there were multiple different cities where white girls in the orphanage system, one girl, I think her parents are blind or something like that, and these people just kept abducting these girls and filling them full of drugs and using them and things like that. And they were all immigrant gangs that were doing these types of activities. And remember, it was thousands of women that were raped. And whenever people tried to bring this to the awareness of authority figures, the law enforcement officers, they were considered racist for talking about these topics. I talked about this in another video I recently recorded, and the point of law enforcement, historically, traditionally, has been to enforce the law amongst the people, make everything relatively equal in that regard. It's very clear in Western civilization now that law enforcement officers are meant to enforce the will of the oligarchs. And the oligarchs right now are very interested in replacing the native populations of various countries in the Western world. And so these things like literally thousands of rapes were just allowed to happen for decades without anyone coming forward. And even after people came forward and it was well known, they tried to cover it up. So like, it wasn't the fact that they didn't believe the people coming out about these things. They knew what was happening and allowed it. They pretty much encouraged it because they punished anyone who came forward too. So I don't know how multiple Western countries got to this point, but that is where we're at. And I do appreciate that Andrew Tate is at least talking about this, even though I have some suspicions about him being controlled opposition. He's getting the word out there. So let's go on. It says, they hide the death of your kids or everyone will understand the mess they've made. So when we're talking about crime statistics, they are just fundamentally not talking about who is committing the crimes in a lot of these cases. And in fact, in some countries, they make it illegal to talk about the immigration status or the ethnicity of the people committing these crimes. It's so weird to me that a civilization can be this irrational, but that is where we're at. It's not one country. It is entirely all of Western civilization at this point. I really can't point out a country that I would say is stable amongst the Western world, unless you consider Russia to be relatively stable or unless you consider Russia to be a Western civilization, because I do consider them to be relatively stable is what I'm trying to say there. Eastern Europe is only a few years behind. Yes, he is completely right here, which is that none of Europe is spared. Canada, United States, Australia, New Zealand, no matter what you're looking at when it comes to Western civilization, it is in terminal decline. A vestige of common sense, Poland has fallen. I would say they fell a long time ago. They were allowed to keep certain aspects for a little while longer, such as the lack of mass immigration to their country, but it was inevitable, given the people in charge of their country, that their country would fall to mass immigration eventually as well. Hungary resists despite EU finding blockades. I have a number of other bones to pick, such as Hungary's support for Zionism. And so I don't really consider them to be in opposition. I consider them to be kind of a puppet offering token opposition, because they are still doing what the Zionists, what the globalists want at the end of the day. So it goes on to say, Hungary resists despite EU finding blockades for now, but globalists and NGOs attack the native population of a very small country endlessly. And that's another thing. NGOs, we know, the CIA has talked about this, but we know that the CIA offloaded a lot of its intelligence operations to non-governmental organizations. It was just easier. You could provide funding to these non-governmental organizations and co-opt some of the native leadership class of the country, and you can conduct intelligence operations through the NGOs. You can foment rebellions, you can foment color revolutions to overthrow governments, you can influence culture through NGOs a lot more easily. And so the CIA just decided like they were gonna outsource their own intelligence community operations, and they do it through NGOs now. And they're psyoping young females into voting in their own rape. Yeah, I saw a number of different cases of this where women will be attacked by a immigrant, and then they will blame white men for not protecting them, and that's very concerning because they're the ones voting in these policies. While they're shackling people from being able to stop these things from occurring. So yeah, it's wild what is occurring throughout all of Western civilization at this point. So it goes on to say, Romania is protected only by its bad reputation, last choice of a migrant for now. Iceland, Iceland. So yeah, Iceland is trying its best to stay away from mass immigration, and the only reason it's working is because people don't want to move to Iceland. Globalists riled up emotionally controlled females to subvert the naturally masculine instinct to protect. I do agree with this, and I talked about this in other videos about why women are so willing to, how do I want to put this? I don't want to say it this way, but I'm going to. Why women are so willing to subvert the nation state and just kind of overthrow things. But I've talked about this before. It has to do with evolutionarily, women are just less physically strong on average, and because of that, they have to form a consensus, and because the media entertainment is telling them one thing as a consensus, they tend to go along with that because they think that's what's going to keep them safe, and it does not end up keeping them safe. And so they have this entire cognitive dissonance and all these other things going on. But we can see that feminism is reigning in the West, and it's led to the complete decline of Western civilization over and over and over again. Feminism does not work. And I'm not saying this just as a male. I know the statistics. Feminism does not work for men, and feminism does not work for females. It just doesn't. We know the data. Men are less happy than they were a few decades ago. Women are less happy than they were a few decades ago. Everyone is less happy than they were a few decades ago. Before these cultural Marxists, before the feminist social justice wars, before they came to prominence, people were much happier, okay? Now, that does not necessarily cause a relationship. I'm saying this as someone who previously taught research methods and statistics classes. It's not causal, but there's enough evidence that there's not, what I said is not a causal claim, but there's enough evidence to support that is likely causal, that these bad belief systems are likely causing, we need to do some studies on it, but it is likely causing the unhappiness amongst the populations of these countries. And the reason studies aren't occurring is because they don't want to know whether their policies are right or not. They only want to enforce their policies because of their hatred, their animus towards mostly white people. But that's the case. That is why these things are allowed to occur without any studies showing whether it's actually good for a civilization to have things like feminism and have things like cultural Marxism and have social justice warriorism. It doesn't actually work, and we're not allowed to study it either. There's no funding for studies like that. So it goes on to say, Native men are not allowed to be men, and we import millions who have zero fear for the law. It's over. Yeah, this is the weird thing, which is they tell the Native population it's not good because of climate change. You can't have offspring. You're not allowed. And they also make sure that you can't afford to have offspring, even if you wanted to, even if you ignored the subversive media. And then they import people to replace you. And you're like, well, wait a minute, I listened to you and now you're replacing me. And it's like, yes, because in the West, your media, your entertainment, your government, they hate you. Thank you so much for investing your time in watching this video. If you found the content informative, be sure to show your support by giving us an upvote. Your engagement goes a long way in boosting our visibility within the algorithm. To stay ahead on the most pressing contemporary issues, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We're committed to delivering up-to-date, thought-provoking content on a daily basis, and we want you to be a part of this journey. Also, your thoughts matter to us, so please share any comments, questions, concerns, and/or critiques in the comment section below. I personally read each one and I respond when necessary. Given the nature of our content, where we expose the actions of the oligarchs who exploit the masses, intentional suppression in the algorithm is an unfortunate reality. If you believe in our mission, you can help by spreading the word. Tell your friends about our content. Let's amplify the voices of those that challenge the status quo. Speaking of amplifying voices, I need your help. As many of you know, I gave up a lucrative career in the fastest growing field and the highest paying subfield of psychology in the United States to move to the Philippines to provide content that I think is important for my viewers to hear. I left so I could avoid repercussions for speaking about topics that are taboo in the United States. This decision came with significant financial sacrifices, but your support can help sustain the work we do. Check out the links in the description for how to support our channel. Every contribution, big or small, is genuinely appreciated. Finally, as a channel, we stand with the people of Palestine. We believe in their freedom, and by supporting us, you can contribute to this shared vision. Thank you for being a part of our community. Your viewership is invaluable, and I genuinely hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Bye.